Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the autumn 2022 season of the Virtual Museum Lecture Series presented by the St. Catharines Museum and Welland Canals Center. Our community is filled with diverse stories, and we recognize that our story begins with the Indigenous peoples of this land. We acknowledge that we're broadcasting this lecture on lands that have been inhabited by Indigenous people for millennia, and we would like to honor the centuries of Indigenous people who walked on Turtle Island before us. Good evening. My name is Kathleen Powell. I'm the curator and supervisor of historical services at the St. Catharines Museum and Welland Canals Center. And welcome back to our virtual lecture series. And a special welcome to audience members out there who are new to the series. Thank you for joining us. I'm just going to bring up my slideshow to start our Oops, that's wrong. Sorry, hold on one second. There we go. Okay, so we hope that these lectures will provide a bit of historical joy and spark imagination and exploration of our city's rich history. There's so many ways to join in on the historical fun and get your local history fix. You can view all past lectures on our YouTube channel playlist. And you can listen to lecture audio on our podcast, VMLS via podcast, which you can find anywhere where you get your podcasts under STC Museum Podcasts. As always, feel free to make use of the chat box to ask questions or send comments. We'll moderate them during and at the end of our presentation. I do want to mention that there's a slight delay in the broadcast. So if we miss your question, we'll get to it at the end of the presentation. We so appreciate you joining us for the lecture series, and we would equally appreciate a donation in support of our programming. Your donations help us to continue to provide the high quality and enjoyable programming that you have come to expect from us. We really appreciate any donation you're able to make. Give us a call at 905-984-8880 or visit the donation portal on our active STC page to make a donation. The link for the portal was included in the VMLS email that you would have received today. Your donation makes a difference. Thank you. Before I hand over our presentation this evening to Karl, I'm very happy to announce the lineup for our upcoming lecture series. On October 4th, we'll welcome back local historian Rochelle Bush to speak about Niagara's Freedom Trail, the loosely connected network of important heritage sites, museums, and other historical places connected to the story of freedom and the Underground Railroad throughout Niagara. On October 18th, we'll welcome special guest Paul Miller to speak about the history and perhaps future of the Queenston Street neighborhood. On November 1st, we'll welcome special guest and historian Dr. Jonathan Vance to discuss his research into corporate memorials with a lecture titled Our Gallant Employees, Corporate Commemoration in Post-War Canada. On November 15th, I will be here to deliver a lecture about the interwar period in St. Catharines titled In the Public Interest, Public Works in St. Catharines Between the World Wars. On November 29th, special guest, local historian and chair of the city's Heritage Committee, Brian Nari, will return to the series to give a talk about early settlement in St. Catharines. As you may remember, Brian loves a good title and offers this as the title to his lecture. Ponderous Fraus, Menhirs, and Jaded Farm Horses, or early St. Catharines before the first Welland Canal. And finally, we're also happy to welcome back Dr. Kimberly Monk on December 13th to provide an update on her work at the Chicluna Shipyard dig. After 2 long years away from the site, Dr. Monk will be back on the dig this summer, and we're looking forward to welcoming her back to hear more about this fascinating history. And tonight, I am happy to welcome tonight's special guest lecturer, Karl Dockstader. Karl is Oneida of the Thames Bear Clan. He's the executive director of the Niagara Regional Native Center during the week, and on weekends he hosts One Dish, One Mic, a radio show that airs Saturdays on 610 CKTB. Please join me in welcoming Karl. Hello, Karl.
Hello, Kathleen.
Okay, so I'm going to leave it to you to take it away and start your slideshow. I will turn off my video and it's all to you.
Thank you for that warm introduction. Thank you to the St. Catharines for the wonderful work that they're doing. It really is an honor to fill the same space as doctors, historians, cool people like Rochelle Bush. I'm gonna tune into that presentation on October 4th. Any opportunity I get to listen to Rochelle, I'm definitely gonna take advantage of. So without further ado, I am going to share a little bit of history with you. Before I share the history, I'll tell you just a tiny bit about myself. But I need to explain a couple things. I have a couple disclaimers here. I think they're the obligatory disclaimers. The first one of which is that I'm not a historian. I just play one on TV, but not really. I play one on the radio. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not a formal historian. I have collected information though, and I'm going to start this presentation with the premise that history as you know it, particularly if you went through the Canadian education system at the same time as me in the 80s and 90s, I'll say without giving my exact age, or previous to that, the history that you have learned probably has a bit of a skew to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give some perspectives on the history that you may know, and I am going to try to cover several hundreds of years of history in a matter of minutes. I definitely invite the questions, thoughts that you might have, and yeah, I'd love to turn this into more of a dialogue and a back and forth. But we all know. We all agree if we're sitting here enjoying a history presentation, then if that's what we've decided to do with our Tuesday evening, first off, I commend you for being one of the good ones with an open mind and willing to be learning. But also part two, you know that if you study history is subjective. I wasn't there. Were you there? Was even Kathleen, as smart as Kathleen is, was Kathleen there? Nope, none of us were there. So what I want to do is try to provide a bit of a different perspective on history. I may take some liberties in the form of storytelling. I'm not going to just lie and give you Haudenosaunee propaganda, but I want to paint a picture from a different perspective than perhaps you've normally gotten when it comes to history. So real quick, the name of this presentation itself has shifted. Originally, I was going to do peace, respect, and friendship centers and talk about the history of the Friendship Center movement. Perhaps that can be a presentation for another day. Our Friendship Center will be turning 50 in 2 short years. That's the Niagara Regional Native Center, established in 1974 with the help of St. Catharines' past mayor in 1974. So there's a good story there, but instead I'm going to give you a bit of a deep dive in the soil that's underneath our feet. So as Kathleen mentioned, you will notice on the one side of your screen the lovely Niagara Regional Native Center logo, and you'll notice on the other side of the screen some of the editorial show art that I've made for the One Dish, One Mic radio show, with a statue of our beloved Chief Diskahe Levi General standing over a toppled statue of Sir John A. Macdonald with a couple crows. doing their thing on the statue. So there you go. There's the two hats I wear anyways. Friendship Center ED by week and radio host by weekend, and all around history enthusiast and proud Niagaran through and throughout all of that. So again, a little bit more about the show. We air Saturdays from 10 to noon right here on the home of the Voice of Niagara, 610 CKTB. We're also simulcast to London and Windsor, and we get picked up by Hamilton now too. So lucky us that a lot of people get to listen to Sean Vanderklis, my co-host from Curve Lake of Mississauga First Nation, and myself. I'm Oneida, Bear Clan. I'll talk about that a little bit down the slides, time permitting. But let's start with what I called this slideshow, and let me start with a little more of a disclaimer. So I consider myself to be quite the enthusiast for history, for the reclamation of our traditions. I'm not necessarily going to get too much into the residential school movement this evening. There will be a lot of opportunity for learning about the true meaning of Truth and Reconciliation Day. If you have questions about that, then, and time permitting, we'll get to those in the end. What I will say is that I do believe that it is a matter of fact that Canada attempted to eradicate my people, attempted to eradicate the Oneida people. And in the effort to eradicate Oneida people and Six Nations people, they devalued our teachings and our ways. So tonight's presentation, I'm going to frame around a lot of historical knowledge. And what you're looking at right now is actually my artist's rendition of the two-row wampum. What I need to say is that I'm not a wampum carrier. I am not somebody that was traditionally gifted with the responsibility to carry these teachings forward. And so I just want to be careful that I'm not misrepresenting myself in any way. What I've been told though, and what I've been taught about the two-row wampum, and I have watched from Ken Miracle to Rick Hill, to going and sitting through our great law recitals, to listening to every speaker that I could ever listen to. What I have heard is that there are some principles and some teachings behind these wampums that are universal. So while I myself am not a traditional wampum carrier, there are some things that I think we should talk about, and that I've been expressly told that we can talk about as a collective. Indigenous, non-Indigenous, it doesn't matter. We should all know that what we're looking at right now is a depiction of the two-row wampum. What you'll see two purple rows, and that's where the Degni Geswenta, the two-row wampum, draws its name from. And what this is a lot of historians will tell you that in 1609, when Samuel de Champlain rolled into the Mohawk Valley and killed a few of the Mohawk chiefs, that the Mohawks went in 1613 and negotiated a treaty with the Dutch, and that's the beginning of the two-row wampum. In actuality, the two-row wampum goes all the way back to our creation story as a people, the time when we first stepped foot on Yunki Nuha Ohunja. And so what this represents classically, historically, throughout the ages is duality, the duality of our ways. One of our central teachings, and again, this isn't sacred stuff that I'm sharing here. This is stuff that anybody can know about and anybody can talk about. We're all about balance. As a people, our fundamental teachings as Oneida, that's my nation, one of the Six Nations that makes up the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. For Haudenosaunee people, or Ongwehonwe people as we call ourselves, we believe in balance. So this two-row wampum represents that balance and the duality of life. We think that for nighttime, you need to have daytime. For every calm riverway, you need to have a whirlpool. For every deer, you need to have, for the smooth silkiness of the deer, you need to have the abruptness of the antlers. We believe that there has to be balance. There has to be two sides to everything, at least. Though there's obviously always a lot that can exist between those two sides. So, but we have to have the duality, the balance that's central to our teaching. But I don't mind talking about how in 1613 the Mohawks came across the Dutch and said, the Champlain guy came along and things weren't so great with him. So what we would like to do is we would like to enter into an agreement with you. The agreement is based on the principles of the two-row wampum. They might have described to the Dutch at that time a lot of what I've explained to you about how we have this older teaching about duality. And so we want to present this to you, and we want this to be the terms of reference for the peace between our nations. So here's the deal. We'll help you. You'll help us. We'll help each other. We'll be friends. Our one ask is that you will have your way of life represented by one of these two rows. That's going to represent the ship, the vessel within which you carry all of your ways. It's not our place to try to get into your vessel and to bring our things in there. It's not our place to impede the flow of that vessel, to change it, to do anything to it. We want you to have this forever. In exchange, we'd like you to respect the fact that in our canoe will be our ways, and you can come to our canoe, but please don't bring your ways to our canoe. Don't bring your belief systems to our canoe, and especially don't change our ways. And so if you agree to that, then we can have peace. And so it's at that time, that's where the first sort of political settler indigenous iteration of the two-row wampum may have started, though again there may have been interactions where these principles were explained in advance of the 1613 interaction. So in addition to this being a piece of history, this being a bit of a guide talking about the duality and the importance of our ways, this also represents just an overarching philosophy of Ongwehongwe Haudenosaunee people. And so it's sort of like, in a way, I mean, we wouldn't have had, flags in the same way that Western societies have flags, but in a way that, I mean, like a flag, this is a visual representation of our ideologies. And so there's so many teachings that I could share about this. And so what I will say though, and I won't say too much more about the two-row wampum, though there'll be an opportunity to come back to it perhaps down the slideshow. But what I will say about the two-row wampum is that I would encourage you, if you want to learn about the two-row wampum, to come to a presentation like this and engage a speaker. If Rick Hill comes to our territory, Tim Johnson and Michelle Elise with Landscape of Nations 360 have done a great job going down to the Landscape of Nations monument down in Queenston Heights Park. Again, perhaps a whole nother presentation that we could do together one day in the future. My advice to you is to learn about these wampums in person, or at least live, the way that we're doing right now, because it's meant to be like a living, breathing continuation of our ideas. And so the problem with the print word is that, first off, the print word is written in English, which is not the language that the principles upon which this is based upon. But the other thing is that once you write something down, it becomes static. You can't change it. It doesn't let, like a river, it won't flow. It'll just be fixed in one location in time. So I've heard even Indigenous presenters go and pull things from different websites and different teachers and different documents. And hey, I love books as much as the next person, and I read all kinds of stuff by our people. But what I would encourage you to do is to go and learn about these things in person, because then you get a chance to have hopefully a dialogue with a bit of a back and forth. And then, but also I think that brings the concept of the treaty alive. So this isn't 45 minutes of two-row wampum talk though. So I'll jump over to the next idea. But I want everyone who's watching this right now, who's listening to me, if you're watching this later on YouTube, I want you to have a look at the two-row wampum. Two purple rows would have been represented by purple wampum beads made out of quahog shells that would have been rare, and it would have taken days, and it would have taken hundreds of days of combined labor to make a single wampum belt. Then I want you to look at the 3 rows of white. For us, when you see white in a wampum, that represents purity. And I actually want you to look at the 2 rows and realize that there's a row of white between them. That white between the 2 rows of the 2-row wampum is supposed to represent the integrity that exists between settler nations and First Nations. And I would say that integrity has been eroded throughout the course of our lives for sure, but before that as well. But that it's still there. It's still the opportunity for that still to continue is there. Also look at the 3 rows of white, and again on another day or time permitting later in this presentation, I'll talk to you about the process of peace, respect, and then friendship, and how there's a succession to them. But lastly, what I want you to understand is that this wampum that represents our ways is a series of horizontal lines. Visually, the horizontal lines represent our way of thinking. So I want you to look at this. Think about it for a second. Now, before I flip to the next slide, think about settler society, especially in the time of early contact, but less so now, but definitely at the time of early contact. What symbol, if you had to describe Western people that were sailing the ocean blue post 1492, visually, how do they represent themselves? What sign, what one emblem, what one symbol would represent them as a people? The symbol they would have used is exactly opposite to the 2-row wampum. The symbol they would have used is this right here, where the 2-row wampum is a series of flowing horizontal lines. The main symbol of the Western peoples that came over from Europe would be a vertical line and a horizontal line that intersect. In a way, the exact opposite of the 2-row wampum. So when you talk about cultures coming together, and when you talk about needing to preserve the distinctiveness of different cultures, I want you to just remember the contrast between the ways that came from Western peoples predominantly and the ways of our people, the Haudenosaunee, one of hundreds of nations now on the back of Turtle Island, but also one of the earliest nations to be encountered by Western societies. And again, these are exactly opposite visually, symbolically, and even in terms of a lot of values. There were a lot of differences, which again, that's why I think if you remember nothing from this presentation tonight, try to remember the distinctiveness of First Nations ways and contrast that to the distinctiveness of Western society, and that our earliest opportunity to have an agreement, my people's earliest opportunity to have an agreement with settler peoples, was to respect those differences and to go, okay, our symbols are exactly opposite, but that's okay. We have a context, we have a framework, we have a way where this can all work out. You do you, we'll do us, and everybody will get along fine. We need to get back to that, and I think it will all work out. I also believe in crediting my sources. So I drew this cross here. I drew this 2-row wampum. None of these are obviously my ideas, but this is a talking point that I borrowed from John Mohawk, a brilliant Seneca doctor, scholar. Unfortunately, the late John Mohawk, but this is a teaching. He's the one that pointed out that these symbols are exactly opposite to one another. So there's some there's an idea. Again, if you only get that one idea from this presentation, just remember this visual representation. So, but here's another visual. So this is one that I created, and it's a drawing of Tadadaho. And so I picked this particular drawing to share with you tonight because, first off, I like it. I think it's cool, and I think you'll enjoy looking at it. But I also picked it because it tells a story. There should be almost no words on my slides because our ideas, again, they don't live on a shelf in a textbook in a museum. No offense to museums, but actually the best museum pieces are interactive anyway. So I try to present this with a visual idea. What this is Tadadaho at one time was this tortured soul who lived in this time of torment and war and violence, and blood flew from the wars into the rivers, and the forests were scorched, as you see in the picture, and his mind was clouded with anguish. And so I drew this picture just to say that we as a people, we really appreciate hard times, to say the least. Our most central teachings really are our creation story, but then followed by our great law of peace. The Haudenosaunee people value the great law of peace. In order for us to respect the point of needing the law, we need to look back on this time with this tortured soul and his sitting in anguish. And you can see, depending on how big of a device you're watching this on, you can see the whip marks on his back. And so for us, this teaching of Tadadaho reminds us that if we lose our ways, when our values are gone, and when we forget our teachings, when we forget that balance, when we live that life without the two-row wampum, this is what can happen. This is the darkness that we can have. And I'm gonna challenge each of you that's watching right now to walk around your neighborhoods, to walk around downtown St. Catharines. And I don't mean to judge anybody who's having any kind of a struggle and to liken them to this tortured soul of Tadadaho. But I'm going to ask you to think about the comfort that you have to be able to watch this on a computer on a Tuesday afternoon, or perhaps later on YouTube. And then I want you to take a look around some of the parks, some of the neighborhoods that exist, surely where I am in downtown St. Catharines, or downtown Niagara Falls, but then in downtown St. Catharines, and to sort of ask yourself, like, are you okay with that anguish, or should we have some laws and some values that help us get away from that? As Ongwehongwe people, our teaching is that our village, our collective, is only as strong as the member that is struggling the most. So when I go downtown and I see one of my people and they're not doing great, then according to my own code, my own laws, I say that I have a greater responsibility to not be too comfortable, and to, at the very least, remember that there are people not doing as good as myself, but also to try to remember that our principles say that we are supposed to be helping one another. We are all brothers whose arms are linked, and should one of us fall, we'll all potentially fall if we don't help one another up. So I wanted to share this, just this little bit about Tadadaho, and this picture that I created to show the importance of the teachings of the great law, and why, as Ongwehongwe people, we need that to guide us, but also as non-Indigenous people, you too can learn about our principles and our teachings. And if you choose to embrace some of our egalitarian principles and some of our pursuit for equity, perhaps these are ways that you can improve your own cities and your own lives and all of our lives as a collective. So the other, this is a more, these are actually photos, and I think I took this photo. I think it's an illegal photo. We have this thing called the Great Law Recital, where we get together as Ongwehongwe people, and we talk about those principles that guide us. At the end of the Great Law Recital, several belts were made with different teachings to remind us of our ways, and again to give us a visual representation, so that the power of us as a people is put into the beads in the form of these pictures. But these are also ideas that represent the values. The reason that this is illegal is because I think they're really careful about photographing some of our older items. These belts, if this is the photo that I took, then these aren't replicas. Like these are belts that are hundreds and hundreds of years old that represent that time, that go back to the Great Law. A couple that I'll point out. There's one you'll see at the very top of the picture. It kind of looks like a wolf or a dog, and I can't remember. The Senecas and the Mohawks both have a belt where they have wolves that protect the edge of our confederacy and give us a word of warning. And in the middle, you'll see a mostly white wampum, and it looks like people. There's only 4 of them here, but there should be 6 of them total in the picture. And what they represent are the 6 clan mothers. So we are a matrilineal society. Dekakedos Niangats, Wagesklewaga Niwaga Telota, Natiaga Niwaga Hunjota. That's a lot of words for my name is Sunrise, Oneida Bear Clan. And I'm Bear Clan because my mother is Bear Clan, and she became Bear Clan through my grandmother. My mother Goody became Bear Clan through my grandmother Myrtle, who became Bear Clan through her mom, Flossie. Flossie's mom was Sarah, who was Bear Clan. So we're matrilineal. We get our nation and our clan from our moms. Some people will say that we're matriarchal, but that's not actually true. The clan mothers and the chiefs balance their decision making responsibilities together. Again, thinking back of that first slide, the two-row wampum, the men and the women have equal responsibility to care for the communities. However, women have a very prescribed responsibility, and they select the leaders. They decide who's doing a good job and who's not. Now just imagine for a second if Prime Minister Trudeau was selected by a council of women entrusted as stewards in keeping the community safe. Imagine how maybe it wouldn't be Trudeau. Maybe it wouldn't, be Pierre Poilievre or Jagmeet Singh or any of the prospective leaders that are there. Imagine in the States, would they have Joe Biden currently? Would they have had the 5-letter word person before Joe Biden if a council of women entrusted with keeping the community safe selected them? I tend to think not. So some food for thought. The system is still democratic in that there still is a selection process through the people. And so it's a very old style of democracy. There is a distribution of power. Again, this isn't a Haudenosaunee governance talk, but perhaps on another day I could sort of break down how our democracy functions and works. What I will say is that the United States has actually affirmed in its own laws and formally thanked the Haudenosaunee for providing a model of governance and for providing a model of democracy and the idea of empowerment. Because again, at that time of the two-row wampum, at the very beginning of this slideshow, when we introduced that principle, you were, you still are in Canada, I guess, to a degree, but especially so 400 and 500 years ago, you were beholden. If you're derived from a Western nation state, you were beholden to a king or a queen who had a sort of autocratic power to rule. And then your leaders would have come here and said, interesting. People are making decisions as a collective through a council of representatives. And then boom, now here we are where that's sort of the only way we know in modern societies is this democracy and trustees, and municipal election is right around the corner. And so there you go. But these concepts were foreign to Western peoples hundreds of years ago, outside of the Greek system and outside of, some other or the roots in the Greek system. And I don't mean to discount that, but seeing a functioning democracy the way that it worked here in North America was definitely something unique to settler societies. And instead of having laws like in a code book somewhere, the way that laws are currently made, what you're looking at here, these wampums, they would have represent our version of laws. Paul Williams is a respected lawyer and knowledge keeper and Mohawk, I believe is a Mohawk citizen, and he wrote a book called Guyanagoa, and in that book he talks about how if I asked you what Section 718E of the Criminal Code of Canada is, probably none of you know. Probably. I don't think I know. Probably most of you don't know. If I asked you about a different source of values, a different place that you learn from, if I asked you what the values you learned from the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, you would tell me all about, oh, this one's too hot, this one's just, this one's too cold, this one's just right, and on and on and on. There's a whole lesson, there's a whole story to it, and most of you know it really, really well. And so that's the logic of us having done things this way. So, a lot of people say primitive or simplistic, or, oh, you didn't have this or that. And we would say, yeah, but we did have these ideas, and we did have this way of visually representing the ideas. And so there you go. There's a little bit about these wampums, these bootleg wampums, that I took a picture of with my BlackBerry to give you an idea of the time frame when I took the picture, that now probably I wouldn't be allowed to take a picture of, but I'm using them now, and so I just hope that we don't get in trouble for being here together looking at this picture. So that's home. We're on there. There again, I took this picture. Probably I should attribute it to Google Earth. I think hopefully Google doesn't come after us. Hopefully the Chiefs don't come after us. I should probably talk to Kathleen about licensing before I put together my next presentation. But anyways, there's a picture of where we live. Have a look on that map, and there's a good likelihood. I mean, this is on YouTube, so maybe you're watching in Australia or something. If so, welcome. Maybe Russell's watching up in Ottawa, friend of One Dish One Mike. Hey, hello. Carly from Halifax listens pretty much every weekend. If you're listening, you're not on there, I'm sorry. So, but this what you're looking at is what I'm calling our One Dish One Spoon territories. And so there's my home city there, Buffalo. Let's go Bills. There's where I live now, Niagara Falls. There's the city on stilts, St. Catharines. Right next there, not indicated on the map. There's Mississauga. There, all the different cities. You've seen a map before. You don't need me to talk about maps. But this is a story in and of itself. This is a piece of history. This is a document that you use. This is a visual representation of Western history. And it's one you're familiar with, so it's one that I'm going to use to tell the next few parts of the story that I'm sharing with you this evening. This is how you look at this now. In 1609, pretend like I didn't just type out the names of Anishinaabe people, Huronia, neutral peoples, and the Iroquoian territories. Pretend that I didn't just type those on top of a Google map, and take yourself back to 1609. And these would have been some of the dominant nations in our particular territory. It's likely that you're listening, if you're listening on this side of the Niagara River, the side that we're on, the side we now currently call Ontario, that in 1609, it's likely that your feet are resting on top of what would have been neutral territory. By neutral, what I mean is an Iroquoian nation. I should distinguish. I should distinguish between Iroquoian nations and the Iroquois people. Iroquoian nations had longhouses, had sometimes patrilineal societies, had some slight differences. You may not recognize the difference between an Iroquoian nation and an Iroquois nation. And I would forgive you, because I don't know if I went back to 1609 if I would know the difference. But anyways, neutral nations were Iroquoian nations, lived in longhouses, loved pottery and lacrosse and all that good stuff that would have been just good times back in 1609. But were culturally distinctive from us, the Haudenosaunee people, a confederacy of Iroquoian nations comprised of the Senecas and the Cayugas and the Onondagas, my people, the Oneidas, the Mohawks, and the Tuscarora peoples. And then Anishinaabe people, again, a confederacy of many great nations, including the Three Fires Confederacy, the Odawa, the Potawatomi, and the Ojibwe people, many different Anishinaabe nations, including Mississaugas are Anishinaabe nations. So these would have been, I like to call this slide sort of the superpowers of the Great Lakes territory circa 1609. I'm just waiting for that really catchy slide name to catch on. So these would have been the dominant nations, confederacies, collections of peoples at the time of 1609. And I mentioned that very, very specifically because it's post Columbus. I'm not going to talk too much about Columbus. We can talk about Jacques Cartier in the 1500s a little bit, and his initial contact with what again were almost definitely Iroquois people, probably Mohawks at the time. It is interesting because in and around current Montreal and what's considered to be modern day Quebec, they're again, because the way land claims work, they're relative to Western contact with First Nations, not necessarily relative to the amount of time that First Nations have existed on the territory. Because of the way Western law works, there is a Mohawk tradition that the Mohawk chiefs recited the roll call of chiefs of the League of Haudenosaunee people all the way back in 1534 to Jacques Cartier, which is sort of setting a legal precedent for a strong land claim by Mohawk people. We're not going to talk too much about Jacques Cartier. I want to talk to you a little a bit about Samuel de Champlain in 1609. So during Samuel de Champlain's first encounter with the Haudenosaunee peoples, Champlain at that time was already in an alliance with the Hurons, who may have used the Champlain and his forces as a bit of a proxy for a beef that they had with the Mohawks. But either way, Champlain's forces shot to death two of the Mohawk chiefs near the north shore of the lake that now is called Lake Champlain. Champlain continued a sour relationship between the French and the Haudenosaunee people. Cartier did kind of mess that up. Champlain continued it, and it continued until the French were sort of lost. We're not on the right side of the, winners and losers. I don't like to be so binary about it, but by the end of the 7 Years' War, the political claim to these territories by the French was very diminished in 1763. So in 1609, anyway, Samuel de Champlain shoots those two Mohawk chiefs. The Mohawk chiefs go, we don't like the French. And so we started our relationship with the Dutch at that time. So that's why I paused this slide on 1609, because sort of before that day and that fateful encounter, this is the political makeup of the territories that we're on right now. Again, very, very, very simplified version of history. A lot of things happened between 1609 and 1763, and I'm not sure that in the time that we have tonight that I can talk about the Jesuit utopia in 1634. I'm not sure. We can't even unpack the Beaver Wars. Though I do want to talk a little bit going back about how the Beaver Wars it's sort of used as this historical shorthand for the Haudenosaunee campaign against the Hurons. And so history books will tell you, and you would think as a pro Haudenosaunee person, history books will tell you that some variation of the Haudenosaunee defeated the Wyandot Huron peoples, and we defeated them and we assimilated them in 1650. That's what history books, probably most of them still to this day, even though we're trying to be a little bit better in more accurately recalling history, that's probably what people will tell you. It's not accurate. It's not accurate. Hold that thought. I'll fill you in on the rest of the story. It's not accurate. According to what I understand, there's a book called The Morning Wars by Daniel Richter, and it's pretty rigorously researched. It's referenced we have our own Haudenosaunee encyclopedia that I got my hands on for several hundreds of dollars. And so in the Haudenosaunee encyclopedia, what it talks about is that among Haudenosaunee people, adoption is a function of naming. The right of the clan mothers, so going back to this belt here, the top white wampum on here, the women's nomination belt, the clan mothers acting in their official capacities could do adoption as heads of the family, clan, or nation. The women induct people into a family, clan, or nation of the League. In the past, if the population or clan of a nation seemed to be at a low ebb, they had the right to call for a war to replenish the population. It's so the idea that we were conquest-driven, bloodthirsty savages, like that terrible book written by the the Orenda, written by that guy who is discredited as indigenous, but now is adopted or something. In the Orenda, they paint this picture of us, very much Last of the Mohicans, where throwing around our axes and being all tough and native savagey, and conquest for beavers for money, and no doubt the beaver wars and the alcohol and a lot of the interactions no doubt brought out a lot of our worst traits. But also, by framing it as the beaver wars, as opposed to acknowledging that these were morning wars, our people were dying, we were losing our citizens, our way of life was under threat. And so we were initiating a lot of this contact in an effort to keep our nations alive, to keep our nations going, and to move them forward. So I'd like you to think, next time somebody talks to you about the beaver wars in a historical context, to go, what about the morning wars? Challenge your historical presenter and see if they have any concept of this. And if they don't, then I think they're not even considering indigenous perspectives, which should, I think, disqualify them to some degree for talking about this period of time with their very, very limited history. So on another day with a little more time, I would love to talk about the history of New France and the British colonies. And I love to talk about this stuff. I love to learn about this stuff. If you do get a historian in, Kathleen and friends of Kathleen, I will tune in and watch every second of it. But what I can say is that in between the period of 1609 and 1763, what Western historians sort of consider to be really the major loss of influence and the decline of the French, at least in these territories that we're in right now, Western Ontario and the sort of Western New York and Southern Ontario. In between these periods of time, there were a lot of foundational principles that were in there, and I think there were actually supposed to be some in between slides. So let me see. We already talked about the symbolism of crosses and how that contrasted with the two-row wampum. We already talked about how the two-row wampum is among one of the oldest Haudenosaunee belts used in diplomacy, depicting the parallel rows of purple against a background of white, the lines depicting the Haudenosaunee and non-Iroquoian living different but mutually respectful lives, and the background representing the sort of purity and goodness that's supposed to stand behind those values. What we should talk about before we teleport from 1609 to 1763, what we should talk about is the dish with one spoon. So exhausted from more. So let's go back to 1701 now. So we've got these wars. We've got the Haudenosaunee people that have absorbed now a lot of the neutral nations into our confederacy. Fun fact that in our great law, neutrals actually play large roles in our historical roots. And so again, this idea of you're in the Confederacy, out of the Confederacy, I think it was a little more fluid back in those days. So, but anyways, we're fighting these wars, and the British are tired of war, the French are tired of war, the Haudenosaunee are tired of war, the Anishinaabe are tired of war, but in the simplest terms, the Anishinaabe, this is a sweeping generalization, but in the simplest of terms, many Anishinaabe nations tended to sympathize with the French. And by this point in time, the agreements that we had with the Dutch as Ongwehongwe people had been transferred to the British. The British had adopted the Silver Covenant chain and a whole bunch of other principles of peace and friendship and respect with our people. But what happens in 1701 is that the Ongwehongwe people go, my Haudenosaunee ancestors go to Anishinaabe peoples in and around these territories. And they say, it looks like the French are using you, my Anishinaabe brothers, sisters, non-binary gendered siblings. And the Anishinaabe go, it looks like the British are using you. And so the Ongwe people had tried before, and they said, remember that thing that we told you about, the one dish, one spoon agreement? How's this sound? How about we acknowledge your land claim to this territory? We acknowledge that these are hunting grounds that we all need. We all need these hunting grounds to keep our way of life going. How about we use the one dish, one spoon as a terms of reference for peace, as a terms of reference for a way of bringing the settlers into peace, and in terms of reference for how to share resources for the land. And before 1701, the Anishinaabe had said, no, there's no, we're not going to. You've not played nice with us in the past. There's no real reason for us to do it. But fatigued by being abused by the nations that had used the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe as proxies, they said, yes, let's do this. Let's use this dish with one spoon as a way to get out from under the thumb of the manipulation by the colonial powers. Before 1701, the indigenous North American superpowers had the leverage to fight for their own bargains, but eventually the nations came together to form an agreement that I argue nothing has actually changed to stop this from being dish with one spoon territories, and that because of the power and strength of Anishinaabe peoples and Haudenosaunee peoples, that this agreement that was reached in 1701 between these nations, that this is actually the supreme law of the land that we're on right now. Now, that is something that I will say is debatable, but I would encourage you to think about the meaning of the 1764 Treaty of Niagara, to study actually Anishinaabe scholars like John Burroughs, to listen to Alan Corbier and Rick Hill when they come to our territory, and to think about, of all the other agreements that were here, I would say that this is the basis for our existing peace. And I have more to explain this. This isn't just like, we signed it in 1701 and so it's ours. It's everybody's, because this is the deal. There's some things that went to reinforce this, and arguably some things have happened that reinforce this to this day. So I want you to think about that time. So at the same time that the Haudenosaunee signed this agreement with the Anishinaabe people, they also went in 1701 to Albany. The British, who had done little to support their covenant with the Haudenosaunee, realized that the French and the Anishinaabe were a threat to them, and it may have been for tactical reasons, but for whatever reason, they agreed that the hunting rights for Southern Ontario would be given to Haudenosaunee people, and the Haudenosaunee people effectively traded their title to the land in a way to the English in exchange for perpetual protection and use of the land from which our hunting rights today seed. And the idea that there's a hunt in Short Hills Park goes largely back to the Nanfan Treaty. I can't say much more about that agreement, but I want you to note the year and the timing. So the same time that the Haudenosaunee are going and they're negotiating with the Anishinaabe people about sharing the land, they're going and they're making a deal that doesn't cancel out the deal they made with the Anishinaabe people, saying that, okay, you can now have access to these lands, but you can never, ever, ever take away our right to hunt, to farm, to live there. I would argue they believed at the time. And so this needs to continue. At the same time that in 1701, the dish with one spoon is happening, and the Nanfan Albany Treaty is happening. In 1701, the Treaty of Montreal established peace and secured hunting rights for Mohawks and Haudenosaunee people around present-day Montreal in perpetuity in exchange for the French at that time ceasing their attacks on Haudenosaunee people. So I want to sort of go back in time and think about the different powers that were there: the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee people, and then the French and the British at the time. So you've got your four superpowers circa the late 1600s and coming into the 1700s, and the Haudenosaunee have gotten the Anishinaabe, the French, the English, and our own nations to agree to terms of peace, all of which, when you're talking about hunting rights, you're talking about the one dish, one spoon. So this has been negotiated, and I think that this still stands to this day, at this time, and it's not a coincidence that all these things were negotiated at once, and that's not to say, again, I'm not going to say that I have some sort of utopian worldview of the 1700s. I understand that there were several wars that were fought, that those agreements were broken and put back together in many different forms throughout the course of the 1700s. But I would encourage you to study up on a historian, PhD candidate pursuing his PhD doctorate at Brock University, Josh Manitowabe, who's actually speaking about the Treaty of Detroit tomorrow in Windsor. But anyways, I would encourage you to really study up on that history between 1701 and between 1812 to understand the Indigenous title in this particular territory. We're running up on pretty close to the amount of time that I have allotted, so I don't want to gobble up too much more of your time. We can't really talk about Lord Geoffrey Amherst, who Amherst, the suburb in Buffalo, is named after, in Amherstburg near Windsor. We can't really talk about how he was in favor of war to try and claim these territories in as much detail as I'd like to. We can't really talk about how Sir William Johnson ultimately went to King George III and convinced them that negotiation and peace was the way to this land. Again, there's a lot that I could unpack there, given a little more time. But it's important that you know these two figures, and that this led to really the culmination of all. And here are some of the different figures in these pictures that I've drawn. So again, on another day, I'd really like to unpack where sort of everybody fits into this historical narrative that I'm fitting. But what I can say is that in 1763, King George III decreed that the lands must be purchased from Indigenous peoples by way of the Royal Proclamation. This is one of the most legally significant declarations in both modern U.S. and Canadian law. That's not an opinion. That's fact. There is a lot of case law that stems from the Royal Proclamation. Land title, as we understand it today in Canada and the United States, is derived from this proclamation in 1763. It was an acknowledgement of land title, and it bound French, English, and Indigenous interests together in a way that would make them, I would say, the three pillars. John Ralston Saul says that First Nations, French, and English are the three pillars of Canada. So, and I would say that stems from really understanding the Royal Proclamation of 1763. What doesn't get appreciated enough, though, is that the next year, in August of 1764, thousands of First Nations people and major delegations from the English came together, and they established the 1764 Treaty of Niagara. And in that Treaty of Niagara, what you'll see is the year that it was established. What you should know is that it's the greatest consensus since 1701 between First Nations, settler governments, and the people of the land. And I believe that it started a peace that yes, was broken in the War of 1812, and by the American Revolution was right afterwards, and then the War of 1812, and then the American Civil War, and so there still was conflict on the land. But I would say that in Niagara and in what was to become Canada, that this 1764 agreement, based on that peace established from the One Dish, One Spoon Treaty of Nanfan and Treaty of Montreal, that it became codified as the law of the land. And what I really want to point out here is that visually, you'll notice the Western society and the First Nations peoples holding hands. You'll notice the year of 1764 depicted here. You'll also notice that those shapes, what do those shapes look like? Those shapes actually look like the One Dish, One Spoon wampum. So from 1764 onwards, a number of things happened. But ultimately it led to somewhere in here. I have this again is my drawing of the one dish, one spoon. What I would argue is that this became the basis of peace that allowed for the establishment of Canada itself. And so when you hear, I believe our community, the Mississaugas of the credit, don't agree. But most Niagarans who live in this territory, most First Nations Niagara residents, regardless of background, will tend to agree that this is one dish, one spoon territory. And so some of those agreements and some of those things that happened all the way throughout the course of the 1700s are the basis for this peace. And so visually, you see this one dish, one spoon wampum that I've drawn here. The real one doesn't look exactly like this, but then when you come back to this wampum here, you'll see the visual representation and the symbolism of that. So before I wrap and open the floor and ask if there are any questions that are out there, I do want to explain the principles of the one dish, one spoon in case you haven't heard them. Again, I'll preface this by saying I'm not a wampum holder. I'm not a treaty expert. But in the same way that I think that Canadians can talk about the principles of Canadian values and should do so freely, even if you're not a Canadian history teacher, I think that Ungwahome people and I think that settlers should understand the one dish, one spoon principles. On its simplest terms, the one dish represents the collective dish within which all of our resources are held. All of those resources are our shared responsibility to preserve and to protect. We can benefit from the dish if we need to draw from the dish. If you're hungry, you can draw from the dish. However, when you have extra, or if you have the ability to replenish what you've taken from the dish, you should. So if you take down, if you raise some land, you should plant it back. If you cut down a tree, you should put down another tree. If you take some water, you should do something to purify some water or to protect some spaces to allow it to happen. There should always be that balance. Further to that, if someone makes a mess in the course of drawing from the dish, and if you think of a ladle coming from a dish into from a larger dish into a smaller spoon, if someone spills something, they should clean it up. If you see that someone else has made a mess, you should clean it up for them, because there's going to be time when you won't have the capacity to clean up your own mess. Those are some of the principles that it's a shared responsibility. And I think that is reflected in Western environmental laws and protections. I think that if you're coming to watch a history presentation on a Tuesday night, you probably have the sort of value system where you believe in this shared collective responsibility. What I am hoping to share with you and I hope I've explained as clearly as I can, is that's the law that our people, Haudenosaunee people and our friends, our brothers, sisters, and siblings in the Anishinaabe Confederacy, that's the law that we use, not a code sitting on a shelf somewhere, but this visual representation that this dish is our shared collective responsibility. And so that's how we've lived, and that's where we get beautiful things like parks. I drew this picture of Montebello Park, where we held a missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls rally in the cold of winter one time to raise awareness. A great representation of the partnership between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples dealing with a shared conflict together. This is where I work by day. This is a picture of the Niagara Regional Native Center, again, a community asset supported by Western governments that fund a lot of the programs, but that's ran by our community members, by Indigenous people, for Indigenous people, leading in Indigenous ways. This is a picture of our totem pole that was actually donated by an old lumber shop to us. Again, perhaps on another day we can talk about totem poles and their unique connection to our territory, and how, even though yes, they're a West Coast symbol, they do have a place and a role in our history here, and have become a part of our history. And right up until, I'm going to bring us into contemporary times. It was only a few short months ago when we were having a concert, and we themed that concert on Land Back to have conversations and talks about what our relationship should look like, what our shared values should represent, and how we should move forward, but also how we can do it while we have fun, and while we share traditional Indigenous foods and have a bit of a rock concert in good times. If you're curious, and you want to enjoy yourself and celebrate Indigenous ways of being, you will be the first people to lay eyes on the picture that I drew. That this will, a version of this will turn into the cover for the powwow that we're going to have just 1 week from Saturday. We will be joined by Phyllis Webstad, who started Orange Shirt Day. Grand entry is at the Meridian Center at 11 a.m. on October 1st, the day after Truth and Reconciliation Day. And so, but the reason that I want to share these contemporary pictures and contrast it against where we started back hundreds of years ago is to say that I'm very grateful to say that our ways have continued. Our traditions carry on. This jingle dress dancer that I drew here, she's able to do this because it is no longer illegal for her to do so. These ceremonies are no longer banned by Canada, and I think that good Canadians on all levels are challenging themselves to be good people and to help us strengthen our ways, to help us see that our ways are value, our contribution is important. One way you can do it is by thinking about that one dish, one spoon, how you can do that in your life, how you can make sure that you're giving back, that you're contributing, that you're sharing, that you're treading lightly on the back of our mother, the earth, that you're watching your footprint, that you're living in a good environmental way. But then another way that you can do it is by supporting the Indigenous crafters, vendors, artisans, community members, and people who are coming together to acknowledge that our Indigenous ways are in fact very special and worthy of celebration, and that we need your help to help us celebrate those ways and move things forward in a good way. Before I sign off, I want to thank Kathleen for inviting me to this presentation. I also think that's helping to impress upon people the importance of Indigenous ways. And yes, we face a lot of challenges, but as you can see, we have a lot of strengths, a lot of shared history, and a lot of wonderful things that we can move forward and create together. So Nyawakoa for having me. Here to talk about the two-row wampum, to talk about the dish with one spoon, and of course, if this isn't enough, and if you want a little bit more, then I encourage you to tune into 610 CKTB every Saturday morning between 10 and noon, and we will talk about contemporary issues from a politics news talk perspective on the radio, and you'll get the most up-to-date modern information. If you really like me, you can head over to onemic.ca and you can contribute to the Patreon that we use to research a lot of the ideas and the stuff that we do. This presentation was prepared outside of this presentation. And so supporting onemic.ca, going over there and supporting our Patreon, allows us to create content like this and to share these stories, and gives me the time to be able to draw these pictures that I hope you have enjoyed. So that's the end of the prepared portion of my presentation. I think I was supposed to do 45 minutes. I think I did closer to 60. I can do unlimited minutes more or not, depending on whether you have questions or not. So Nyawakoa.
Thank you so much, Karl. I really appreciate your talk. That was so great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm going to put up our conclusion slides, but don't go away, because hopefully we'll have some questions to talk about related to that. So give me 1 second here. Oh,
Slides.
Yeah. Okay, so again, thanks very much, Karl, for your presentation. And so for those people who are watching, if you have any questions or comments for Karl, please post them in the chat box now, while we wait for, there we go, there's the chat. While we wait for any further questions or comments, if you enjoyed tonight's presentation, please consider making a donation to the museum so that we can continue to deliver the high quality programming you expect from us. We really appreciate any donation you're able to make. You can give us a call at 905-984-8880 or visit our donation portal on our active STC page to make a donation. The link for the portal was included in the VMLS email that you received today, and your donation makes a difference, and we thank you so much. We'd also like to remind everyone to please like, follow, and subscribe on all of our social media channels, including here on YouTube, WordPress, and on our podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoy our content, please share it in your networks to help more of our community join in our historical adventures. Coming up next on the museum's virtual museum lecture series is Rochelle Bush, as I mentioned earlier on, with Freedom Trail on October 4th. And the virtual museum lecture series is produced by the St. Catharines Museum and Welland Canals Center and the City of St. Catharines. And I will stop my sharing. And we'll be able to take any questions or comments. I'll take a look in the chat in a sec, but I just wanted to note two things, Karl. One is I love your drawings. They were great. I really do. I enjoyed them so much. What a great style you have.
Thank you.
But I also wanted to comment about this idea of history always being in movement. I think that, there was a school of thought with historians, probably in the past, but that history was this fixed thing that was always the same. And it was, you should consider it the gospel truth, whatever you've read in this history book. And that's not the case. And I think most modern historians would agree that's not the case, but your lecture did a really great job of, even bringing that more to the forefront, I think. And so let me take a look at the chat. Sorry, I've got the chat kind of in my other computer over here because we can't see the chat and Zoom at the same time. So we had a question from Karl D. I think this is your person who listens to your radio show. And their question was, where are the original wampums held? And did each side of the treaty have one?
So I'd like to know more about where the 1764 Treaty of Niagara is held, because what happened, and again, I really need to qualify this by I am not a wampum historian, but the earlier wampums that you would have seen, like the belts that I took a picture of, those are held by our Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and some of those were repatriated by a museum. I actually heard a funny story from a chief who I know, whose name I will not mention so I don't get him in trouble, who he was just kind of driving back and forth across the border, like many of us do because our families live on either side, and found out that he should have been declaring them, though again, because of the Jay Treaty we have rights. And so he found out that they would have been appraised. I can't remember whether he said $2 million or $10 million, but the way that you or I might throw a sweater in the back of our car, he had these wampums sitting back there, these millions of dollars of wampums. And so now perhaps that's why I can't take illegal photographs, and why I need to be more careful about them. So the older ones anyways are Confederacy keeps. The newer ones I'd be curious about, because if you go to the Fort Erie Native Friendship Center, you see a picture of the William Dunny friendship belt on it. That was actually commissioned by a French governor. And so it would have been made by non-Indigenous peoples, and the 1764 wampum would have been made by non-Indigenous peoples. So I will find out, and I will report back on One Dish One Mic. It may not be this Saturday, but if you listen to One Dish One Mic, I'll find out where the contemporary wampums are, and then we can be sure. But a lot of them are held in museums and held in places of trust, and they are much more valued now. 100 years ago, they were, the history books said they weren't important, so they were given this much of a priority. And now we sort of realize, we have these really rare slices of history, and so some originals can be found in Ganondigan. Ganondigan is near Victor, New York, just outside of Rochester. There's a great living history museum that's there where the Seneca people have worked to protect and preserve that information. Six Nations, if you follow Six Nations tourism, they have a whole bunch of different historical learning opportunities. Your museum colleague, Clark Bitter, over in the Niagara Falls History Museum, they have some items that they have on hand. So they are in places where they're accessible to community, but they're kind of all over, and it sort of depends on who commissioned it and whose they were, and so who gets to care for them.
That's great. Oh, thank you so much. I wondered about that as well. I have seen a couple of wampums in some museums, national museums, and was quite impressed. It was kind of a little bit of an awesome moment for me when I saw them in person. Like as a historian, I get kind of nerdy about that kind of thing, but I was quite impressed with it. And yeah, I was wondering about the rest of them as well. And so that's a great question. Thank you so much, Car D, for asking that. um, oh, this person also said to tell you that they now have video confession from his Halifax group. So I guess based on that that answer.
Oh, okay. All right.
Let's see what else we've got. We've got lots of people who are, sending shout outs and hellos. A local, or I don't know if you know, local historian Brian Nari. He mentioned that there's an interesting article right now in Canada's History magazine about treaties, negotiations, and the interaction between the First Nations people and Euro-Canadian settlers. So that's something that could be interesting for people to take a look at as well. That looks like generally the questions from the chat for sure. I think that the main question I have is kind of, maybe it could be a wrap up, is, as historians here, like us at the museum, and historians who are trying to make sure we're telling a story that encompasses all things, all people and all things. How do we make sure that we're telling a story that ensures that the Indigenous, it doesn't sound like Indigenous people don't exist, because we want to make sure that all people are equally represented. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I go back to that one dish, one spoon agreement. But even where I started with the two-row wampum, or even the fluidity of our principles, and understanding that it's really tempting to look at things through a historical lens. And I did it myself, stamping dates, on different pictures, literally, to sort of do it the way the historians would do it. But to remember that these ideas have always lived here. And that, I mean, life itself, predates our own recorded history, no matter how, whether it's oral or written history. And so just to remember that the sum of the land that you're living on right now is more than what you might have read in a book. It definitely predates 1492, and it probably goes back. There's even some questions about the ice shield in Niagara, and when First Nations came here exactly, but just to try to look as far back as possible. But also that's why I ended with that we do have, it really will be something there. If you don't do anything cultural in the next 9 days, what I would encourage people to check out is those jingle dress dancers. And what's really significant about the jingle dress dancers that'll be at the powwow is, at the same time that the jingle dress came around as a form of medicine, is around the exact same time that Canada banned and made jingle dress dancing illegal. And yet we used it as a form of healing, as a form to lift our communities up, and that we were able to continue it on into this day. So the idea that the city of St. Catharines, the Meridian Center, the sponsors of the powwow, the Indigenous community members who are working tirelessly together, the idea that we can even have a powwow of this magnitude, is really a testimony to the history that existed, both those hard parts, and that the jingle dress being banned, but then also the great parts, that it's now celebrated, and that we should work to celebrate and to acknowledge, and just by having me here today, by talking about wampums, by hopefully knowing what one dish one spoon represents, and the two-row wampum, and this history of this land. So just remember that it's a living history. That's something Ganondigan celebrates regularly over in Victor, New York, and it's something that I would encourage historians around here to really think about, is that it's not just history, it's living history.
Thank you so much, Karl. I think that's a great way to wrap it up. And thank you again for your patience with our technical difficulties in the the spring, and for coming back and joining us today. And I wish you all the best of luck with the powwow coming up. And I will be there, and I hope that everyone who's watching will be there as well. And I'm sure it's going to be an amazing event. I can't wait. So thank you so much, and we will see you very soon.
You'll see me on the other side. I'll be watching Rochelle on October 4th. Circle that on your calendar, everybody. Rochelle is an amazing, gifted presenter. So you'll see me, but I'll just be little letters listening quietly. I can't wait. I cannot wait. Thank you for putting these together, Kathleen.
Thank you, Karl. Have a great night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Okay.